Howdy, folks. Welcome to another episode of Cedar Craft. Today, I wanted to talk about Cedar policy evaluation and how authorization works, a couple of subtle things in the semantics, and how validation allows us to avoid all kinds of potentially difficult to reason about error conditions. So if we go to the Cedar Language Reference Guide, here there's a page on authorization, and it gives the semantics. And I wanted to just highlight this kind of default deny policy. So as we've seen in previous episodes, a Cedar policy has both forbid and permit policies. So you have this set of policies, right? I have this big long list of policies. Some are permit, some are forbid. When I evaluate the policy for request, what happens? Well, the guide tells us exactly what happens. If any policy, any forbid policy evaluates to true, then it doesn't matter what the other policies do, right? Maybe, all of these are permit policies that evaluate to true, but this last one here is a forbid. It says deny. Well, then the whole shebang is going to be a deny, right? The only way you ever get an allow decision from a policy is if none of the forbids evaluate to true. So all forbids are false, and at least one permit policy evaluates to true, right? That's the only way you get allow. Otherwise, if there are no policies, the result is deny, right? So this is sort of this default deny behavior. And one other thing that combines with this in potentially, tricky ways is that Cedar ignores any policies that error, right? So if a policy errors, like let's suppose instead of this one accepting, it just errored. Well, it just doesn't count, right? And now that can be tricky if, for example, a forbid policy errors. That can change the result, right? Instead of this now overall being a deny, well, if that forbid policy errored, then we're going to go to an allow because all the policies that didn't error were permit and they all evaluated to true. So the decision will be true. So let's look at some examples of this, hopefully to make it a little bit more concrete and give you a flavor for how this stuff works. Okay, so here we've got this simple little policy. It's got two policies in it. And the first is a permit. Maybe this is for some kind of document or resource sharing website. And basically by default, we want to give people, our users, the ability to look at stuff. So what does this policy say? This first one says, well, we're going to permit any principal to view any resource, right? So it doesn't matter what the principal is, doesn't matter what the resource is. If the action is a view, we're gonna permit it. We're gonna let it go through. Except, maybe this is for who knows what, library or something, and there are maybe it's like an online forum, and some resources might get flagged, and we don't want minors to be able to view flagged resources. So we're gonna also add down here this forbid policy, which says for any principal trying to view any resource, we're gonna forbid it when that principal is a minor, right? So their age group indicates that they're a minor, and that metadata has been flagged, right? So if you think about, all the possible requests, we're basically saying we want to allow. Let's go to green. We want to allow essentially anything except for this situation when a minor is trying to view a flagged resource, right? So in here we want to say don't do it, but everything else should be allowed. Okay, so that's what this policy says. And we can look at a couple of example authorization requests to get a sense for how this might work. So here we have one where we're saying, can the user Alice view image 1? That's request 00. And here in request 1, we're asking, can the user Bob view document 1? Okay, so let's take a second before we run this to think about what we expect to happen. And of course, to answer this question, we need to know what the state of our application is like. What is the age group of Alice? Is image 1 flagged? And for that, we go look at the entities. So here we see, Alice is indeed a minor, right? So Alice should not be able to view, anything except for flagged resources, right? So let's go see in request 0, Alice wants to view image 1. So let's go look up image 1. And down here for image 1, we see actually image 1 is flagged, right? So image 1 is flagged. So we expect request 1 to be a deny because Alice is a minor trying to view a flagged resource, and our policy says that minors should be forbidden from viewing flagged resources. Okay, so we're going to expect under policy A-OK, request 0 to be deny. What about request 1? Well, this is Bob's trying to view document 1. Okay, let's go look at Bob. Bob is not a minor, so he should be able to view anything under this policy. And at any rate, document 1, if we look at that here, it's not flagged anyway. So we expect request 0 to be denied and request 1 to be allowed. So we have this little script here, a test script, and we're going to look at a few different policies and how they behave under different errors, etc. But right now we just have this, our policies A-OK, those two requests, and we're just going to run them and see what they do. So let's run that. Look at the output, see if it does what we expect. And sure enough, we see request 0 here was deny, just like we thought. And running it with the Cedar command line, it even tells us why, right? So the policy 1, the second policy there, said minors can't view flagged resources. So Alice was denied from viewing image 1 because it was flagged. But request 01, when Bob was trying to view document 1, that's allowed, which is what we expected. And that's because by default, we put at the top, we said, permit any principal to view any resource. And so that meant Bob was in fact allowed to view allowed to view document 1. So we're going to go through a bunch of these, and I want to keep track. So far we have under policies A-OK, both request 0 and request 1 were allowed. Let's go make a note of those, because we're going to look at a few differences. So under A-OK, request 1 for Alice was denied, request 0 for Alice was denied, and request 1 for Bob was allowed. Okay? So now let's go back to our code and look at a potential mistake that we might make, right? So here's something that you could imagine, yourself or someone else doing. We have this other version of policy A, but we've made a mistake. So here in this version of policy A, we've said, we're going to forbid the request when principal.age group is less than 18. Now that doesn't make any sense, because if we go look at our Cedar entities, age group is not an integer, it's not a long, age group's a string, right? So we've made a type error here in our policy, but we could still run it, right? Like if you send this request, it's not going to make Cedar crash. It's going to give you an answer. It's just probably not going to work the way you expect. So let's go put that into our test set so we can compare. So this is policies A bad. And let's go back and run that test. Let's pipe it to less so we can scroll through this. So we see A-OK still deny allow, and then A bad is allow, right? So that's a bummer, because that means our policy where we were trying to forbid minors from viewing flagged resources didn't work, right? This allowed Alice to view image 1, which she shouldn't have been allowed to view. Now, Bob was still allowed to view document 1, which is great. That's how it should work, but we still have this type error. Now, one thing that's nice too, I wanted to emphasize, is that unlike A-OK, we also got these errors here, right? When we did the evaluation, Cedar told us, hey, I was running your policies, and along the way, you did a comparison that doesn't make any sense, right? You did this comparison between an integer and a string that's bogus. I'm going to ignore that policy, and that's why we got allow here instead of deny. But we did get a note. So one, big takeaway from the video this week is you should always check the diagnostic. Always check the response, see if any policies errored. And if they did, that's, a pretty serious issue that you should look into right away, right? If you have policies that error, you should go figure out why they're erroring and fix things, because this is an indication, Cedar's got our back, right? This is an indication something fishy is going on. But we'll talk in a little bit about how you could find that even earlier. Okay, so anyways, we went from deny allow to allow. So let's make a note of that, right? So here we had A bad, that's where we had our error. That changed to allow, which was a bummer, right? This allow shouldn't be there. Okay, let's go look at another way, though, of writing very similar policies. So I have another set of policies, B, and instead of having two policies instead, I just have one permit policy. But the intent is that it means the same thing as the A policy. So I'm going to slide this back over so that we can look at it right next to A-OK and do this comparison, right? So in our original policies, we said, permit anything but forbid miners from viewing flagged resources. B works a little bit differently. B says permit any principal trying to view any resource unless, so instead of when, we're using the unless clause here, unless the principal is in the miner age group and the metadata is flagged, right? So our intention is for B-OK to be equivalent to A-OK, right? The idea here is that, if this permit does not evaluate to true, well, like we said at the beginning, Cedar semantics are default deny, so that should prevent somebody from accessing the resource unless they're, not a miner and the metadata doesn't have the flag set. So let's run that. And first we'll need to update our test script to additionally include the B policy. So we have B-OK. And now we can run and see what happens for B. So if we go down here and look at B-OK on request 0 and request 1, well, it works just like A-OK did, right? That was our intent, so no surprise. We deny Alice from viewing image 1 like we wanted. We allow Bob to view document 1 like we wanted, right? So A-OK, B-OK are fine. When they don't have errors, everything is good to go. Let's make a quick note of that. B-OK was also deny allow like we'd hoped. But something interesting happens if we make a similar mistake in the B policy as to what we made in the A policy. So here in this B bad policy, we've made the same kind of mistake that we made in the A policy, right? Instead of comparing the string, we did a less than again. But I want you to think, when we go run the test, will we get the same results that we did for A bad? Remember, A-OK and B-OK gave the same results. Will A bad and B bad give the same results? This is maybe a good pause the video for a minute, think about it. But let's go ahead and update our test script now and see, we'll just run it and see what happens. Okay, so we got our test script updated. Let's run through it. We see the A-OKs, A-bads, B bad. Here we go. Well, B bad is deny. So it doesn't allow Alice to view image 1, which is what we expect. We want that. But it doesn't allow Bob to view document 1, which he should be able to do. So this is deny. And the thing that's confusing about this, if we go back to this table we've been building up, here when we have B bad, check this out. This one's deny. So even though we basically made very similar mistakes in A bad and B bad, right? The way we screwed up our policy, comparing an integer and a string with a less than, now that was kind of a similar mistake. We got wrong answers for A bad here. For A bad, we got a wrong answer here in that we allowed something that shouldn't have been allowed. But in B bad, we got a wrong answer here where we denied something that shouldn't have been allowed, right? And so this is kind of surprising. It's very subtle. Like, when will you have your policy evaluate differently than you expect depending on the error? Well, it depends on how you write the policies. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't particularly want to have to reason about these sort of very subtle differences in semantics. I would much rather just be in this world where I don't have errors, and things behave intuitively, right? I can reason about things like equivalence of semantics, right? These ones that don't have errors, they go the same way, just like we expect. And that's the world I want to live in. So that's why we have validation in Cedar. So if we go, there's this page, by the way, on the authorization semantics is really good. But even better is coming back again to validation. If you do validation, there's all kinds of errors that just can't happen. And if you go through here, you can see there's this nice list of all the ways in which validation prevents errors. So let's look at that for our example. And what I'm going to do is I actually have a schema here that I'm going to rename so that the IDE plugin picks it up, I believe. And we might have to wait for VS Code to refresh a little bit. Can close that. And sure enough, right? Now that we have a schema, all of a sudden, the IDE immediately warns us, hey, this doesn't make any sense, right? So if you're using a schema and you're doing validation, the tooling will help you find these kinds of mistakes, right? Same thing here with BBAD, right? We immediately get a warning that something is going wrong. And it's not just for the IDE plugin tools. It turns out that the command line tools also support using a schema. So we can drop that in here, and I believe we'll get a little bit more help as well if we use the schema when we do the validation. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, so maybe not. Maybe we just have the same error messages. But anyway, the point is you should always do validation, and you can always run the validation command. So if you look at Cedar validate help, we could run Cedar validate on our both requests and policies to make sure they follow the schema. We've already seen that before, so I'm not going to go through it again. But the big thing I wanted to emphasize today is that Cedar's default deny, but policies that error are ignored. And if you don't want to reason about how those things can subtly interact, what you really got to do is make sure to validate your policies, use tools that are schema aware, like the VS Code Cedar extension, so that you get those warnings up front and you make sure to take care of them. Okay, folks. I think that was kind of all the big points I wanted to share today. Again, make sure to validate, and we will make sure to see you on the next episode of Cedarcraft. Have a great day.